Welcome. You're here with Con
and Cash
from the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, and tonight is a special evening. We're going to be giving our supporters, our donors, community advocates, refugees, a really hands-on, warts and all, really transparent briefing on how Medevac works. Cash and I are going to unpack the process, how we got here, what it looks like at the coalface, why we need Medevac, the impact it's having, how it's saving lives, what the challenges are, where your donations go when you support this work. This gentleman, you can ask them right now, just comment under this live stream. Now, a warning, we're going to be talking about sensitive things. It's really hard when you're talking about a medical crisis, and it's impossible to talk about it without talking about what it looks like in the human face. And so this could be distressing to some viewers. So if you're sensitive to this, this is your chance to kind of, I suppose, walk away from the live stream, but a warning that we're going to be talking about some sensitive issues tonight. But look, let's kick it off. I'm going to start by getting Cash to introduce herself and talk a little bit about what she does as well. Yeah.
So my name's Cash and I'm a caseworker in the detention advocacy team here at the ASRC. I've been in the team since June last year, so I've actually been here throughout the Kids Off Nauru crisis. I was here when the Medevac bill first went through Parliament in November, was filibustered. We had to wait till February to see what was going on, and we were definitely planning and doing a lot before that. But when Medevac came in, we had a lot of work to do. So I've been here for all of those changes throughout the program and the shifting sort of environment on the islands as well. And I've spent hundreds of hours on the phone with clients that we work with, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some of that with you.
Thanks, Cash. So look, last time we did one of these webinars, it was February. And at the time we were celebrating the passage of Medevac, and it was significant. So what is Medevac? Why was it significant? And what happened after? So Medevac was basically the passage into law of a law led by Karen Phelps with the support of the ALP, the Greens and the Crossbench that guaranteed seriously ill refugees in Papua New Guinea and Nauru a pathway to medical care for the first time ever. People that were waiting up to 6 years for medical care were finally able to get medical care. It was for once doctors being listened to instead of politicians making the final call. So we passed this landmark legislation together as a sector, as a community, with your support. Now the challenge was, what happens next? Well, the difficulty was, we've got this medical crisis. We've had 12 people die in offshore detention centres before Medevac was passed. We had people with serious health issues spanning up to 6 years being left in limbo, in despair, in horrid conditions that the UN itself considered amounted to torture. And suddenly we had a legislative pathway that allowed doctors to actually make the final call unless there were serious character security concerns to make sure people got the medical care that they need. So the ASRC came together with the refugee sector as part of the Medical Evacuation Response Group, a coalition of refugee and human rights organisations trying to respond to this critical humanitarian crisis of hundreds of very ill people in need of urgent medical care. Now the real challenge for us was, we got this through, but there was no funding and no resourcing for it. And so the ASRC found itself in a really big sort of crossroads moment around, well, what do we do here? We actually don't have a budget. We actually don't have any funding. We don't have any resources. But what we've got are lives at risk and lives at stake. So we made the decision to just start scaling up and just start growing and growing our detention advocacy program. I mean, in fact, the ASRC has been working in detention centres since 2003. The first time Manus and Nauru were open in the 2000s, as well as in onshore detention centres for the last 16 years. But this time round, over the span of this year, we've scaled up our team to now have 8 staff, 7 of which are totally funded by just out of our savings. And it's work we can't actually keep doing without your support. But that's its context. Medevac passes, we form a coalition called the Medical Evacuation Response Group, and the ASRC puts up its hand to do what we do best, which is to lead the casework part of the work, to be the first point of contact for doctors and lawyers, but most critically all refugees. But I need you to understand why Medevac is so important, and that is to get Cash to explain to you what was life like for sick refugees in Nauru and Papua New Guinea before Medevac was law.
I mean, it's been really hard over there prior to Medevac and throughout Medevac. The big difference is that this is the most clear pathway for them to actually access care. These people have had pending medical concerns, pending requests for transfers, pending chronic, acute, ongoing issues, and apparently there was a system in place to support this, and it just drags on, and they wait and they wait and they wait. And yes, Medevac still takes a bit of time, but this is still faster than anything they've experienced before. It's clear, there's some proper supports around it from the casework team, we guide them throughout the process, and we're able to reach far more people on the islands and support more of them than we were able to before.
And we'll unpack practically how Medevac works shortly. But what we need you to understand is, before Medevac, it would take up to years for people to get medical care. When you were trying to get sick children off Nauru, we were actually having to partner up with law firms to go to court, weren't we?
Critically ill children. You know, when we were doing the work, we would go home at the end of the day and we were not sure if when we came in tomorrow, the children would still be alive. You know, having to speak to parents and just say, good luck through the night, speak to you again at 9 tomorrow, and trying to work with lawyers and just, when are we going to court? Can we go to court? Let's go to court, you know, and all the legal stuff that, you know, I don't fully, you know about, trusting the lawyers with that, and just holding so much emotional weight from all these families. And it was a lot. And now we're able to have a clear process. We've got so many wonderful doctors helping us, and we can actually have much more of a fair and even flow, which is a complete difference.
So we would actually have a situation where we would have children we were working with who had stopped eating, walking, talking, children that had fallen into a comatose state, what we call resignation syndrome, because they'd been locked up. Like in countries like the UK, a child cannot be detained for more than 48 hours. It's illegal to do so. But here in Australia, we were locking up children as young as 6 months old, 2 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old. Kids were being locked up for up to 5 years. And we were actually having to go to court to force the government to medically evacuate children that had stopped eating, walking and talking.
6-year-olds even.
Yeah. So if you're wondering why Medevac is needed, what we had before Medevac was no one would get medically transferred unless they were close to death. No one would get medically transferred unless they were actively trying to kill themselves if they were an adult. Think about that as a threshold. No one get medically transferred until they were at death's door. Like we had the case of Hamid, a 24-year-old young man in Manus Island who started with a foot infection and then died when that infection spread to his brain. 24 years old. The coroner said he would have been alive if there was something like Medevac at that time. And we would have many people not evacuated at all because trying to get someone to Papua New Guinea before Medevac, was that even possible?
Very, very, very difficult. Very difficult.
Why was that difficult?
With Nauru, the healthcare services that are available there are quite well defined.
Yeah.
And what was available in Papua New Guinea, there is a tertiary hospital there. So the government and Papua New Guinea were able to argue a bit more strongly that they were able to provide the services. But what is presented as being available versus what is actually available are two completely different things. And on Nauru, we were able to more clearly, alongside with our legal partners, clearly define what was and was not available. So the avenue was just a little bit stronger. But once we did get all the kids off, obviously we reshifted now and we are focusing on both islands more equally. Yeah.
So this is why it is so critical. I want to move to talking about how Medevac actually works and really to unpack that, because you've got Peter Dutton out there attacking the Medevac process, criticising the Medevac process. And what Kash and I want to just do is just unpack practically how it works. I want to talk at a high level very quickly, and then Kash is going to talk practically what it's like when someone actually makes an application for Medevac. So this is why Medevac is important. Basically what it does is this, and that is that a critically ill refugee can apply under the Medevac law and say that I'm not getting the medical or psychiatric treatment or assessment that I need. Then what happens is there's a whole process that has to prove that, and Kash will explain that in a moment. But if that is demonstrated, Peter Dutton or David Coleman, the Minister for Home Affairs or Immigration, have 72 hours upon receiving that application to make a decision. So before, where they could sit on a case for a year, 2 years, have to be forced by court or never make a decision. That was the case for all the men on Manus Island. 5 years later, still waiting for any sort of action around serious health issues. They have to make a decision within 72 hours. And if the doctors can objectively demonstrate that this person can't get the psychiatric or medical care or treatment that they need, the minister must approve that transfer unless he's not satisfied with that, or if there are concerns around there are national security risks, the minister has the power under the ASIO Act to say no, or if they've been convicted of a serious criminal offence, again, the minister has the power to say no. So let's say the minister says no, but not on security or character grounds, but on health grounds. It then goes to an independent health panel that's made up of 9 members, all appointed by the government, a third of which are actually government doctors. And 5 out of 9 actually need to overrule the minister's decision for that person to be brought here. And in fact, to show the independence and robustness of the system, the health panel actually agrees with the minister 70% of the time. But overall, the minister actually agrees with the doctors in 83% of all applications. So that's to set the scene. So where people, upon it being lodged and accepted, within a week, people will get a decision when the government is adhering to those timelines. There are challenges right now in that the government's trying to exploit technicalities to drag that decision out much longer than what the law actually allows if it's followed in good faith. But you go from 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years to never, to a process now where doctors must be listened to, and where the minister, unless he's got compelling security concerns or character concerns, actually needs to follow what doctors are recommending, which is how it should be. Now, that all sounds pretty straightforward, but what you need to understand is the huge amount of work that goes underneath it. So you've got Peter Dutton out there attacking Medevac, saying 2 doctors from Nimburn, anyone can just basically sign off and get someone medically transferred. The reality is starkly different, isn't it, Cash? What's involved? So let's imagine I'm a sick refugee on Manus Island and I want to get medically evacuated. Is it something simple? Does it something take a week? Is it just a couple of doctors have a quick chat? How does it actually work?
Definitely not. First of all, we have the refugees make an application via the MERG website, and even that is actually quite difficult. We've laid out the questions on there. We're trying to extract as much medical information as we can.
We really want to demystify
Please describe your main medical condition. Yep. What medication do you take? What medications should you take that you are unable to take? But right away, what we see is, what is your main health condition? And you get, I have headaches as the answer. Now there's language barrier. There's difficulties in just communicating and expressing yourself. The idea that a person is going to know to say, I have headaches, I've had them for a year, they've become more severe, they're actually migraines, I should be taking this medication and I can't. This specialist told me I need this and I need an MRI, but I haven't been able to get it. That's really hard for someone, especially speaking English as a second language, to get across in the form. So we get some initial information, which is great, but then we need a lot more. That involves a doctor very close at the beginning, calling and getting started on some further information as well. We need to call and do informed consent with these clients, because even though the consent's there on the website, we believe in really explaining things to people so they're actually knowing their rights. So we need to call them, explain that, go through the process, ask them to sign a consent form. And then even the consent form, we're talking about people who don't have access to laptops. Nauru has one shop where there's a printer apparently. How are they going to sign these forms? How are they going to read them? Can they do it on their smartphone? Can they click it and can they, sign on there? Can they get it off to us, And then on that form on our website, we ask them to upload any medical records that they have. Again, how are you going to send all your medical records on a smartphone?
And people don't even know that it actually costs hundreds of dollars to even get your own medical records.
That's
and a lot of these people have no money.
Yeah.
So how are they going to get their medical records?
Not to mention the blockages of even trying to ask for your records. We've heard of people going to the hospitals, waiting in the waiting room for hours at a time, trying to speak to reception. The form they have to fill out is really complicated. And then even if they manage to get their records, maybe they come on a disc. What are they going to do with the disc? How are they going to get that to us? So even just at the start, the idea that we're going to get all the information nice and clear, get the medical records, and off our doctors go to do their specialist reports, that's just not the reality. And it's because of the challenges on the island that are put in place to make it harder, and also just the challenges that the people we're working with are experiencing, because they're suffering ongoing trauma, ongoing stress, plus all the medical conditions affecting them. If you were that sick, are you going to be able to, go and get this and go and do that and achieve all this stuff? It's just, there's a lot there.
I can think about a number of times where I would be on WhatsApp with men on Manus Island. And they'd be saying to me, I've lost sight in one eye. I got to see a specialist once in the last 3 years. They told me that, look, this could be temporary or this could be leading to permanent blindness. I went to the local hospital. They said they don't have the equipment to do that test. The specialist told me I need this medicine. I have the money for it. And by the way, the chemist doesn't even stock it either. Just to watch, I think about when I went to Manus Island back in November 2017, when I got smuggled in, and to go and see it for myself. And what stood out to me was the total lack of medical infrastructure, deeply under-resourced pharmacists, hospitals that can't even meet the needs of their local community. And that what we've got are what sound like, how serious are those things to begin with? Like constant migraines, glaucoma in the eye, some kidney stone
problems,
pain,
blood and urine.
Blood and urine. And I just think about the sort of things, if you had
disc problems, chronic, really heavy stuff, yeah.
And like that blood and urine's a great example where here, you go to a doctor and they say they found blood in urine. They will put you through every test to make sure you don't have, for example, prostate cancer or kidney cancer. There's nothing. There is just, let's hope you don't have the early warning signs of cancer. That's actually what we're dealing with. So you've so far mapped out, even just getting it started is difficult. One is, I gather as caseworkers, you're explaining even how to fill in the form because English is the first language.
Explain the process, getting interpreters on the phone, trying to help them get their file through freedom of information, trying to make sure they've got consent so they're actually being listened to and respected. Yeah.
That's so trying to
advocate with them and support them either to go and get the medical records themselves, which is what the process that they have to do in Papua New Guinea. We can't get those records for them. That's difficult in itself. In Papua New Guinea, if the records don't come, there's actually no privacy laws related to Australia that we can utilise or apply pressure to say it's been X amount of days, where are these records? And then if you get the records, missing records, issues with that. And as you were saying, specialists, they might have seen a specialist, but these are very small islands, especially on Nauru. They're getting in trainee doctors. They've got contracts with other countries for them to come and do their registrations there. They may get some great specialists from Australia, but they come for a week. They blast through a whole bunch of assessments and then they go again. And then they don't see a specialist again for 10 months.
They come once a year. And they've left all these recommendations around tests and medicines. And then you talk to the refugee about it, like, I can't get any of those tests. And then did that happen? No,
the specialist left.
Nothing was actually done. So this sounds like something that could be taking dozens of hours. So we've just gotten started. So what comes next? So we obviously work with these amazing legal partners, and there's hundreds of incredible volunteer doctors and specialists out there. So let's say we've finally got the file, we've got the consent. The work's only just begun, hasn't it? What comes next?
Yeah, so we're really working in parallel with our medical partners, because as they're doing their medical casework and they're doing their calls to the clients and they're doing their assessments and they're developing their reports, we're still working with clients that, regardless of if their main health concern is a mental health issue, there's definitely a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of distress around this process. If you think about how stressed out you are when you go for a job interview and you're just waiting to hear back on did you get the job, or you put an offer on a house and you're waiting to hear back on that, you imagine the stress you feel in that. Think about feeling the stress of being put through a process where you may finally get the health care that you need. So it's a really heightened time for our clients, and the doctors are doing what they need to do, and that's great, but we do have ebbs and flows of self-harm issues, incidents of suicide attempts, just people confused about the process in general. And so what our team is really doing is beyond the actual, progressing them through, we're there for the emotional support. We're there in solidarity with the clients. We're trying to manage expectations, keep things calm, and help them actually navigate and make it through in a way that keeps them safe.
And I know when we were submitting to the Senate committee a few weeks back around why Medevac must be saved and not repealed, as the government's trying to do, I was highlighting some of the figures that our doctors had found, our doctor partners, which were 57% of the people we're working with are actively considering suicide, 97% have serious health issues, and 91% have serious mental health issues, and on average they have 4.6 different health issues. And I saw a shocking figure, which was a sample size who had gone trying to get medical care in Nauru. Over a 3-month period, this group of refugees had to present 25 times to try to get medical care, and half were readmitted. So what I'm hearing is a health system that is unable to respond, but also that it sounds like we're doing a lot of suicide prevention work. Like, It must be such hard work to face into every day around, here are people left for 6 years with limbo, despair, in awful conditions, with a health system that has no capacity or resourcing to respond to their needs. And that level of despair that the team must be facing into, what's a typical day like? It must be pretty full on.
I think it's a very unique role, and I think it really takes a special kind of person or special kind of people to do it, because even though we're very lucky to be a part of Medevac and to get to have been a part of Kids Off Nauru, which are huge steps, leaps and bounds forward and changes for offshore detention, day to day there isn't necessarily a lot we can do for a person. So you might be on the phone to a person for an hour and a half. You know, you're taking down a lot of important information, you're doing some advocacy work, but when you go to end that call, there's no, great, well, we'll fix that or we'll refer you to this. You know, the services just aren't adequate. We have to work alongside those services. We don't want to undermine those services, but we acknowledge that there are very deep limitations to those services. And so we have to work our way around it, sort of find the cracks where we can sort of achieve something with our clients. But a lot of those calls, there isn't necessarily anything you can do other than sit with that person in their distress.
Because this is the challenge, isn't it? I remember, and I can't go into too much detail out of people's privacy, but we've worked with people whose kidney stones had grown to a point where unless they were passed or there was operation, they could have died from that. It's madness. When another person had been violently attacked on Asylum that was about to lose a limb. Like, this is what, I've lost count of the number of people where they could have had the early warning signs of cancer, where people were at risk of losing organs. It's the fact that it's got to this point, and that must be part of the hard thing, isn't it? Where people are sitting there saying, I'm thinking of taking my life, I'm continuing to lose sight in my eye, I'm continuing to have blood in my urine, and you're actually not able to say you can go and get this medicine or go to your local hospital and get treated, because you know they'll be bounced back, turned away most of the time. And in fact, I remember reading in The Guardian about how Border Force is actually directing their own providers to actually edit and censor their own medical reports to make sure that what is being captured isn't actually what's really happening. Minimizing, because for that to be properly documented exposes the government to such profound medical neglect, which is what's actually happening.
And I think, a prime example is access to mental health services. You know, on Nauru, for example, there are mental health services that are there, and, you know, they are doing the best that they can, but it's actually not possible to recover and heal from trauma when you are daily living and existing in a detention space where you are experiencing ongoing trauma. So, you know, some of these services are doing the best they can, but we often hear from our clients, you know, we say, are you receiving support for mental health? Do you have someone to speak to? And they'll say, yes, I get an appointment once a month. And you go, okay, what happens at that appointment? And they say, oh, it's about 8 or 10 minutes long. And they ask me, you know, if how I'm going. I tell them I'm not sleeping. They ask me if I want to hurt myself. I say yes. And they go, okay, we'll up your dosage on your meds. And they send me out the door. So is there mental health support there? Yes. Is it adequate? Is it meaningful? Is it actually doing something for these people? No. So when you dig a little bit below the surface, it's very clear that there's so many roadblocks and so many issues for the people that we're working with.
And even here in Australia, our specialist torture and trauma services in Australia actually don't work in detention centres in Australia, because they basically say it is pointless trying to provide mental health services in an environment that is the root cause of people's mental illness. You're actually trying to help people adapt to a circumstance that is so harmful and damaging. It is a pointless exercise. So in Australia, torture and trauma services don't work in our detention centres for that very reason. Within this, what's also interesting is, so any one case, just to summarise you, to capture you carefully, it sounds like dozens and dozens of hours of work. We've got to help them apply for Medevac, navigate them through the website, working with interpreters, trying to help them get their medical file, convince them not to take their lives. I hear caseworkers every day, please don't kill yourself, please don't harm yourself. Encourage them to do their best to try to access whatever is there locally. Then we've got this amazing network of volunteer doctors out there, then trying to find two. And even though the Medevac law requires it just to be 2 doctors, we know the government's so desperate to refuse people's cases that we often go way beyond what the law even requires. So in most cases, you've got 1 or 2 specialists, then working with our wonderful legal partners for them to get involved in often cases. So we've got doctors to work with, lawyers to work with, the client to keep updated, trying to get the medical file, their instructions, their consent, navigating
welfare calls, risk assessment calls, updating them, and then even when the submission is made, as I said, that is such a high stress period. The doctor's work is done, the lawyer's work is done, we still need to hold them in that space. And if there's an approval or a rejection, they need support after that as well. So we're there right the way through.
And so we're talking 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 hours per person for one application. So while you're listening to Darren out there lying and being dishonest about how Medevac works, it's actually the work of multiple professionals, our organisation and multiple other organisations and medical partners that we're working with. One of the things people keep asking me is about, well, why do we need funded staff to do this work? And why do we actually need them? Why do we need to even have this program? And why am I tonight asking you to donate to our emergency Medevac? Why do we even need this?
We have to remember that we're dealing with human beings. You know, there's not really a way for us to process people through this in some kind of automated software system without any human engagement. We're also working with a cohort of people that have suffered a lot and really need that additional emotional support and that additional guidance, as well as the language barrier, which means we need to utilize interpreters. We have to make international calls, which I said average probably 45 minutes to an hour and 15
and
minutes.
We're
covering all of that.
$11,000 a month we're spending on this.
We would love to use, to do Skype to Skype, for example, but one of the islands actually can't get Skype on their phones. The network doesn't allow it. If the weather's bad, then all the Wi-Fi and the data goes down the island. So even just the phone calls, it costs a lot, it takes a lot of money. And our caseworkers, including myself, are doing these high-level calls, day in, day out, just to help people to move through the process and try to keep them safe until they can hopefully transfer.
Thanks, Cash. If you just joined us now, you're here with Con and Cash from the ASRC. And tonight we're doing a webinar taking your questions shortly and just trying to explain from end to end how Medevac works, trying to bust the myths you're hearing about it and talk about the human reality of it. What we want to move next to is that despite everything we've talked about, and hopefully we've been able to get across to you the criticality of what we're doing, Medevac is at risk of being repealed. So let me talk this through with you. So why, you might be asking, because what you've basically heard so clearly is Medevac is saving lives, saving organs, saving limbs, and giving people hope. 12 deaths in offshore detention centres before Medevac, none since. Here are the hard figures around Medevac. Being just over 170 applications lodged. Think about the amount of time Cash has talked about that just one takes. We've had over 150 approved and 130 physically now transferred to Australia so far for medical care. Here are some of the hard facts. As of last week, when cases were lodged, 83% of them were actually approved by the Morrison government. That is, in 83% of cases, Peter Dutton or David Coleman, those two relevant ministers, actually agreed with our doctors. So while you hear Dutton out there saying this process has no integrity, no robustness, and it's not needed, actually the government agrees with our doctors in almost every case. Of all cases approved, 94% of successful cases were waved through by the minister himself, by the Morrison government themselves. In other words, in almost every case that's been approved, bar 6% of them, it has been Dutton or Coleman, the relevant minister, saying, we actually agree with the doctors. The doctors are actually right. These people cannot get the medical or psychiatric treatment or assessment. You can't have it both ways. You can't on one hand say it's not needed, but on the other hand, agree with almost every case. 0. That's the number of cases that have been refused on security grounds. 0. There's been no one refused Medevac on the grounds that there is a security concern. So Dutton goes out to and argues the following. 1, it's not needed, despite his own government and himself agreeing with doctors in almost every case. 2, these people are a security risk, despite the fact that no one's been refused on security grounds. And 3, even if someone had some sort of criminal history, we don't deny prisoners in this country medical care, do we? 4, this idea that somehow our security is at risk as a community. What Dutton doesn't share with you is that every single person brought here for Medevac is placed into a detention centre while they get the medical care that they need. All of them. Every man we get here, tragically, is placed there. In fact, they're gloating about how few they've actually sent to hospital yet. But they're all in detention, and they remain in detention under lock and key by Peter Dutton for as long as they deem fit. And that can't be reviewed or challenged. So it's a lie that these people can ever pose a risk. Not that any do. They're all innocent human beings who are simply seeking our protection, and the majority of who have been found to be refugees. The next great lie is that Medevac is actually making people self-harm, and that people like Cash and I are actually coaching people. This is what I was asked before the Senate committee. And I was talking about how obscene this is, that people who have spent their lives, I've spent almost 2 decades trying to help save the lives of refugees, only to be accused of trying to drive people to self-harm. I mean, this is what is so obscene about this, that a government that sits there pretending that it cares about people dying at sea while breaking and punishing those who don't. You can't have it both ways. And when the Senate committee asked Home Affairs, the most senior person in immigration, do you have any evidence that Medevac is causing self-harm? No. Do you have any evidence that these people have caused a security risk to this country so far? No. Have you got any evidence that anyone's been coached to self-harm? No. In fact, all you have are people like Cash and other end saying, please hold on. And in fact, what I said to the Senate committee is there would have been hundreds of deaths by now if not for people like Cash, if not for the amazing work of our legal partners and the hundreds and hundreds of wonderful doctors out there volunteering their time. That's the truth. Medevac works. Government agrees in almost all cases. No one's refused on security grounds. Doctors are empowered to actually decide the medical fate of people instead of politicians. And the government wants to repeal this. Now, what happens next? So a Senate committee has just heard 74 submissions around whether Medevac should be repealed or not. 73 were in favour of saving it. Doctors, nurses, nuns, teachers, lawyers, human rights organisations, humanitarian organisations, refugee organisations, peak medical, legal bodies, everyone, save it. Guess who the one was opposing it? Of course, Peter Dutton at Home Affairs. But think about that. No one outside of the Department of Immigration supports it. In the House of Reps, it's been repealed. The only person supporting the government was Bob Katter. Helen Haynes wouldn't, Zali Steggall wouldn't, Central Alliance wouldn't, the Greens wouldn't, the ALP wouldn't. And now it goes before the Senate, and the week of the 11th to the 14th of November is most likely the government will seek to repeal it. And it will come down to the vote of Jackie Lambie. And we can't speak to how Jackie's going to vote on it. We don't know. We just hope she does the right thing by refugees. What we know is the reason we've had no more deaths, the reason why self-harm is actually, instead of spiking, has actually gone down in recent months, is because people know finally that there is a medical pathway to the care that people need. And that it's actually working. It's orderly, it's robust, it has integrity. And that's why the government agrees with our doctors in almost every case. And it's the only thing actually keeping so many of our people from losing hope. Now, I've had lots of people asking, well, what if Medevac's repealed, and should I even be giving to this appeal? What if Medevac gets repealed in November? You know, where does the money I donated go, and what happens to this work? Do you suddenly stop? Now, I need to remind you that the ASRC has been working in detention centres since 2003. I used to be in there running legal clinics quietly, helping people get legal advice while immigration wasn't watching. Pamela Kerr was our detention rights advocate for more than a decade. The same person who found Cornelia Rao wrongfully locked up in detention. We were the organisation that actually brought out the evidence of that Reza Barati was actually killed in Asylum. He wasn't trying to escape. We leaked the first plans for Nauru, Papua New Guinea and Christmas Island the first time round. More than a decade ago when those centres were open, we were there then as well. We're going nowhere. But what does happen, Cash? So let's say in the worst case scenario, and we're not, if any refugees are watching or hearing of this, we're not trying to cause any panic. We are doing all we can to save Medevac, working as part of the Medical Evacuation Response Group. We are doing all we can for people to see reason. And that's why we were all as a sector before the Senate committee last month arguing passionately to save Medevac. But let's say in the worst case scenario, if it was repealed, does our work stop?
Absolutely not.
Has people's support been for nothing? What happens next?
No, we were here before Medevac and we will be here after Medevac as well. One of the best things about the ASRC and the best thing about being part of the detention team is that we are extremely adaptive. We don't want to be reactive, but we are very adaptive and we can pivot and we will be there to do whatever we can. It's going to be a process. If it is repealed, it's not going to be easy, but we're not walking away.
Yeah. So right now, we've got our biggest priority right now is being able to sustain our work, being able to keep doing our work. And that's why we're asking you to donate tonight. We are self-funding all of this from our savings. It is putting everything else we do at risk for nearly 5,000 people we look after here in Melbourne and support our advocacy across Australia. And we are doing all we can to get as many critically ill refugees medically evacuated, working with our incredible refugee sector. But we need your support to keep this work going. In a worst case scenario, if Medevac was repealed, there would be hundreds of people here in onshore detention centres now through Medevac that we would be advocating for, supporting and working to get medical care. And without trying to cause any panic or concern, I'll go gently here, we know quite well what would happen to the men left behind and the women left behind in Nauru if Medevac was repealed. And we know we'd have a full-time job just trying to keep hope for people that have gone from a process that is guaranteeing people access to medical care back to a process where it's a dream. So quite tragically, if Medevac was repealed, not only would our work continue, it would in some ways be even harder and more complex and more critical. So look, that's us setting the scene. And you're here with Con and Cash from the ASRC doing a live webinar to our supporters and our donors and advocates and refugees around, we wanted really to be transparent around our work, how we work with others, how Medevac works. And tonight we are asking for your donations. We are asking you to get behind our emergency appeal. So many people, are out there outraged about what is happening to the men in Papua New Guinea and Nauru. Well, Medevac's one way to actually end this cruelty, to stop more deaths. We're actually doing this right now, 150 people already. So if you really want to see change, well, here's a really practical way to do it. And we also want to acknowledge while we're doing our live stream that we couldn't do any of this work without the dozens of wonderful community advocates that are out there as a lifeline to refugees, the incredible refugees like Beiruz and Shamadine and Aziz, who's now in Geneva, championing refugees. We couldn't do without the dozens of wonderful organizations that we work with, and the hundreds and hundreds of incredible doctors like Dr. Sarah Townsend and that incredible team that she leads. So we want to acknowledge this is a team effort, but we're talking tonight about how we're a critical part of that, a linchpin to that, the first contact point, the first port of call, the linkage with doctors, the linkage with lawyers, the people on the other end, stopping people from self-harming and taking their lives. We're a key part of it. And this is where we need your support. Now, we've done our part about kind of laying the scene and trying to give you a broad picture. And now what we're going to turn it over to is your questions. Now we've got at least a good dozen that our team's going to start reading out. And these are questions, all week we've been asking you to submit questions in advance. So every question you're about to hear read out has come from you, our supporters, our donors, our followers. And then you can also still add other questions. And if we can get to them, we will as well. So in the comments section of this live stream, start putting questions. We'll try to be brief to get through as many questions as we can. So over to our team. Courtney, do you want to start reading them out for us?
So this question was sent in by Jennifer. How long does the Medevac application process take?
Cash, on average?
So we can go quite quickly when a case is extremely urgent. But in reality, from start to finish, considering the challenges along the way, considering that we're very principled and we need to do everything with informed consent, and that we really act as partners with our clients. We don't just go off and do stuff without them. We need to get medical records. It does take time for these very complex reports to be written. You are looking at probably 1 to 2 months around about for this process to be completed, but for some it's longer and for some it's shorter.
And then it's lodged to the secretary, who, if satisfied that everything has been provided, gives it to the minister, who then has 72 hours to make a decision. They're at the moment exploiting that and basically dragging out what should be a 3-day process. Let's be frank and honest with you, to a couple of weeks at the moment. And we have a backlog because the government is deliberately trying to undermine the Medevac process, so let's name it and call it out publicly. And then separate from that, if the minister refuses, it goes before the independent health panel, who then also have 3 days. And then they're meant to medically evacuate people as quickly as possible. And when they're doing it right, it happens within a couple of days. And there are times where they're just dragging it out and not medically evacuating people. So we are fighting at all fronts together as part of the Medical Evacuation Response Group. But again, even with all those challenges and complexities, we have had close to 140 people approved for medical evacuation from Papua New Guinea. In the 18 months before Medevac, guess how many we got approved for medical evacuation from Papua New Guinea? 1. We've gone from people never getting medically evacuated, waiting 2 or 3 years having to go to court, to getting medically evacuated from the time we begin to then within a couple of months. That's real progress, that's real change. And you only have to ask the men in Papua New Guinea or the men in Nauru to tell you how much Medevac is the only thing actually keeping so many of them going right now.
Yeah, and you're also right that the threshold, the amount of self-harming is reducing. I don't have a clear number for that, but this is the first time where people with chronic conditions and people with conditions that are not critical crisis mental health conditions are finally having their issues addressed. So this idea that there's a need to harm is ridiculous, because they're seeing their friends, they're seeing people around them finally go for kidney problems, for back problems, whatever it is. And so it's that feeling finally like, wow, I might have a chance here, and I just need to be a part of this process and work with these people.
And the Medevac law is deliberately, and the Medevac law is deliberately framed in a way that doesn't require a person to be self-harming or at death's door. The whole point was actually not to unintentionally be encouraging people to do so. So the threshold is at a level that requires no such thing to actually be. It's about, if you're not getting the treatment you need or the assessment you need, you could be on a path to a chronic or terminal illness. That's why that's so important. And that's actually the threshold. Next question.
A question here from Simon. How many people are the ASRC detention advocacy team working with right now through the application process?
Oh God, it's a lot. Look, it is in a given week, it is dozens and dozens and dozens of people. In a given month, it's over 100 people a month that the team is working with. It just doesn't stop. And what's so tragic is 6 years of neglect and limbo in torturous conditions has just created hundreds of really unwell and sick people. And so we are struggling to keep up. In fact, being honest with you, again, to actually keep up with the sheer demand, we're just adding, even though we're struggling to fund what we're already doing, the crisis is so big, we're just adding 4 more locum staff for the next couple of months because, again, we have the money, we're just grabbing another 60, 70 grand from our savings and going, we actually can't keep up. We're about to grow our team to 12 for the next couple of months because the crisis is so big, the need is so constant. We're actually just adding 4 more staff. We had a new staff member start today, another one starting later this week. We actually can't keep up.
We just have to do it. Yeah.
This question is from Miriam. What happens to those who are sick but their application is rejected?
Yeah. Cash, that's a really tough one.
So, I mean, we can answer that in 2 ways. One, if they're rejected by the minister, they obviously go to the panel.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's still that space there. And again, this is the whole point of the process, is that the decision doesn't just sit with the minister, that it's a medically led process. On the other hand, if a person is rejected completely, it's definitely not the end of the road.
Yeah.
Our doctors and our team go back, reassess everything, and look at what's possible, whether it's a resubmission or, you know, looking at some other issues going on.
Because being refused, Cash, doesn't mean they don't have a health issue. It can mean a range of different things, can't it?
And certainly if they are refused, I don't imagine anyone miraculously recovering anytime soon. So their health conditions are likely to actually become more complex.
And sometimes some of the challenges can be, it could be so long since a specialist or proper doctor has seen them that sometimes we've got medical reports that are 1, 2 years old. And so sometimes the challenge is going, what you're presenting us with, is it recent enough? Or we've been struggling to get their freedom of information file, but they're sick and so we're needing to lodge. So often it's just a case of documentation or being able to even access some medical care to get a current assessment, isn't it?
We also have people who, for whatever reason, may be dramatically losing weight, right? If someone's, for example, bedridden, let's say, you know, losing their eyesight, mental health issues, you know, we know that if you don't move for long periods of time, your weight goes down dramatically, right? You're not able to go to the hospital, to go to the health services. You're starting to really give up.
So sometimes some of the most vulnerable people are being punished for going, well, you could have gone to your hospital, but they become so mentally ill or so unwell, they're just bedridden.
But then, so the question is, all right, so the person says, you know they're losing weight, you know that at a certain point there's a risk of organ failure and all sorts. How do you get their weight? Right? For that, you need them to go to the hospital. And then, even if they get weighed there, you got to wait to get the records, which normally take a month to come. So getting on the ground, accurate information to be able to put in these specialist reports is also really difficult.
It really is. I'll never forget the remoteness of Manus Island. You know, getting to Port Moresby, having to take another plane to East Larringal, having to get on a boat to Manus Island. Like, just the level of poverty, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of healthcare, the conditions people were held in. Like, there have been, people are going, but there's been billions spent. I can tell you, none of it's going to healthcare or mental health care. It's going to the pockets of dirty multinationals. Next question.
Yeah, this is from Nick. Why can't these people get the medical care they need in Papua New Guinea and Nauru?
I think we've kind of touched on that multiple times. Look, I think at the heart of it, when you're in somewhere like Papua New Guinea, you actually talk to local people like, we can't get the medicines we need. Most of what we need, pharmacists can't stock. You know, things sometimes as basic as things like an ECG machine is
MRI not available.
Yeah,
all sorts.
All sorts. Mental health services in Papua New Guinea, non-existent. So I think what we're trying to get at is, because what the government is so clever at doing is going, well, if it's good enough for the Papua New Guinean people and the Nauruan people, why isn't it good enough for these people? Who said it's good enough for the Papua New Guinea and Nauru people? I'm outraged at the fact that Papua New Guinea and Nauru in the bottom 10 or 20% in terms of health outcomes and life expectancy. Where is that aid money going? I'd love to know. And within all of that, going, shouldn't the threshold for Australia be our system? Shouldn't we go, would we accept this as Australians? Like, would we accept someone maybe is going blind, could die from something that is easily treatable here? And that's why it was great, like seeing St. Vincent's Hospital come out going, we'll take everyone that's medically evacuated and treat them, because they're bumping no one off a wait list, they're taking no one's wait list or hospital bed away. So many of these issues sound so benign, but they're benign until they're treated. But the things are like, kidney stone, some blood in your urine, all these things, some pain here. I remember seeing all these men in their early 20s that had the physical ailments of what you would think a 6-year-old should have. That was through the constant suffocating heat, the malnutrition, the dehydration, the lack of medical. The men used to tell me when I was in Manus Island how they used to queue for 3 hours just to get their one tablet for the day. You know, you've got to understand what we are accustomed to here. None of that exists there. And we know that through the fact that we have had multiple coronial inquests that have basically said these people have died because of the lack of proper medical or psychiatric treatment and assessment there, and they'd be alive if for it. Next question, please.
Scott wanted to know, once people get to Australia, how long is it taking them to get the medical care that they need?
This is the really hard one. So some of you might have heard the government coming out and going, how few people they've put into hospital. This is one of our big fights right now. We are in this impossible Sophie's Choice situation right now, which is we're trying to get people medically evacuated. And then the people getting medically evacuated who are far better off, they are in the Australian system, even in an Australian detention centre, they are a heck of a lot better off. No one should be locked up in different detention centres when you're a refugee. These people should be in the community. But we know they're better off than if they were in Nauru, Papua New Guinea. And we know if there's a medical emergency, they're going to get treated. But what we're really troubled by is the reports we're hearing from the men we've got medically evacuated that, in fact, St. Vincent's Hospital, credit to them, came out publicly last week, a couple of weeks ago to the Senate, and actually said the conditions in which people are being treated that have been medically evacuated here is Orwellian, and talked about people being handcuffed, talked about guards following them everywhere in hospitals, and basically talked about how the government, upon bringing them here, is trying to humiliate them even further and doing their best to slow down access. Think about how sick and evil that is. Let's call it what it is, evil. To have agreed that these people need to be medically evacuated, to have brought them here, and then again be doing all you can to slow down access, slow down responsiveness, and slow down care, going, well, we'll teach you a lesson for coming here. It's complex. They are getting medical treatment, but the pace, the quality, and the responsiveness are all far from what they should be. And that's a whole other front we're trying to lobby and advocate on. And again, one of the big issues, like you would be seeing, is the fact that our detention system, unlike our prison system in Australia, has no statutory framework. There are no laws that govern it. So there is no independent checks and balances. And this is the problem. The bigger issue, when we talk about Medevac is not a settlement outcome. It's not a pathway to end offshore detention centres. It's none of those things. But let's name the root cause of people's sickness, which is indefinite offshore imprisonment. Mandatory detention is the cause of this cancer, of distress and illness. Indefinite detention, the refusal for this government to take up New Zealand's offer and resettle people. We know why these people are not getting better. And we see this in the children. You should see the difference of the kids that a year ago weren't eating, walking or talking, who now come to our food bank here with their mums. Yeah?
Yeah.
And you might describe one without giving too much detail of from the child that's suicidal to the children you see now that are here.
Yeah, and I think what's important is to know that it's not like this, they get here and suddenly they're better.
No.
Like a lot of these kids have gone through a real process to get better. But it is amazing when you see them here, and even when you see some of the adults that have come out as well. You know, they've got hope for the first time. They can walk around, they can go to a park, they feel safe, they have opportunities, they can meet new people, you know, and even just for the parents, you know, when you say, how's the kid doing, whatever, you know, he's joined a soccer club, you know, he's doing great with his homework, like, it shouldn't be so special, and it is.
But it is. When you think that same child wasn't eating, walking or talking or sleeping a year ago this time. And I think, you know, what I want people to know is we are fighting for the people that are being brought here, as well as fighting for the people that are yet to be brought here. And this is what we talked about, that even if Medevac was repealed, our work to make sure the people already brought here get the care that they need and get seen where they should be seen by the specialists and doctors they should be. That's what we're fighting for as well. And we're doing all we can to hold this government to account. Other questions?
Ali asked, what happens to them once they have received medical treatment in Australia?
Yeah. So look, one of the other great lies that the government is touting around is, well, they can't be sent back. Look, of course we don't think these people should be sent back. I mean, their mental illnesses and self-harm has come from being locked up and left for 6 years in Papua New Guinea. Their health issues that have finally been treated upon being returned are going to get worse. But the sad reality and truth is the government at any time can send these people back if it wishes to. The minister has total discretion, because technically these people are deemed transitory persons. That is, they have no legal status. That's why anyone medically evacuated here, we can't apply for protection for them here. The Refugee Convention doesn't apply. Now remember, we're the only Western country in the world that's a signatory to the Refugee Convention that has a legal regime that gives people no legal status here on the basis that they've just come by boat. So if they're brought here, the government can send them back at any time. Now, whether the government will find doctors willing to sign off on sending people back to the very conditions that made them suicidal, that's on the government's conscience. But what we would expect at some point is the government would return these people.
I'd also like to mention that we do work with a lot of men, women and families who, while on Nauru and PNG, were actually experiencing family separation.
Yeah.
So some of their family members may have come to Australia before or after these policies relating to arriving by boat. So we've got people who are here now who might have seen their daughter or their sister or their auntie for the first time in, well, definitely 6 years since being on the islands, plus who knows how long before that. And the threat of return is really, really scary.
Yeah, and at the moment, what they're doing to some of the people is saying to them, to people that have the minority who haven't been found to be refugees, is saying to them, "Well, take this amount of money, or we're going to put you in a prison." So it's relentless, and the whole thing is about just making sure no hope comes, and just
constant threats,
and just
constant pressure.
And this is part of why the government wants to repeal Medevac, is because it gives people this little bit of light and hope that maybe I will be seen as a human being, maybe I'll have some dignity, maybe I'll be treated like a person and get the care I need. That's what's keeping people going right now, quite honestly. Next question.
Yep, so this is from Tom. How do I best lobby to prevent the Medevac bill being repealed?
Yeah, so great question, Tom. Look, at the moment, we're working through, as a refugee sector, how do we best campaign around this, and look out for the ASRC in the coming weeks, working with our sector around campaigns and actions around this. So that's a watch and see space, as we're trying to find a way to do all we can. So we've been lobbying behind the scenes, all key politicians around these. As a sector went before the Senate committee, there'll be a public ask, but we're just wanting to make sure that whatever we ask the public to get behind helps and doesn't unintentionally hinder what we're trying to do right now in saving Medevac. So it's a watch out space.
And just the last question here from Nadia. What is the ASRC's role in lobbying around the Medevac?
Yeah.
Repeal of Medevac?
So we do a handful of really critical things. One, we did a legal submission to the Senate committee deciding on whether Medevac should be repealed. Two, we presented before the Senate committee for an hour with our sector. Three, we brief all independents, crossbeds, ALP Greens, Central Alliance, all key people that are supportive of Medevac. We give them regular updates and make sure that they are across the very latest and do all we can to support them in their lobbying of the government to hopefully have a change of heart. Four, we use our social media platforms to keep people educated and aware of what is going on. Five, we work as part of the Medical Evacuation Response Group in joint lobbying, reports, submissions and campaigning. So we are humanly doing everything we can. And right now, what we most seriously need from you, it could be $2 you give, but what we really just need right now is to help us power what we're doing and keep what we're doing going, and help us together keep saving people's lives, because it really is life and death right now for our people. And the most powerful thing you can do right now is donate tonight, you know, and then we'll come out and let you know when it's time for public action. Keep sharing the stories and voices of the men in Papua New Guinea and Nauru. Keep sharing it with your friends in your community. Keep busting the myths you hear out there in your workplace, in your place of faith, in your sporting club. Keep sharing what we're putting out there across your social media platforms. But right now, we have to keep this work going. You know, I just talked about how we're actually adding 4 more staff for 2 more months, just so we can keep powering through and help as many people as we can, because we cannot keep up with the sheer level of crime. I've never seen anything like this in 18 years. So many sick people, so many broken people. And the one thing we are doing, yes, we're getting people here, it's not ideal. That is, people being kept in detention centers. But what we've got is this: no one else is dying, self-harm is reducing, lives are being saved, people are not losing their limbs, people are not losing their organs. It's actually working. It's actually like a miracle. A miracle it got past. When you look globally what's happening around refugees and this race to the bottom of cruelty and fear-mongering that we're seeing our government trying to do, it's a miracle it even exists. And what we've been able to do with our incredible network of doctors out in the community and amazing legal partners and refugee organizations we work with, it's a miracle in a way. And we're doing this, we're winning, we're doing something really powerful and important. And it really is now or never. It really is now or never. And with a risk that Medevac could be repealed, it's really now or never. Like, we need to just keep going. And this is why we need your support. We need you to chip in whatever you can afford. And if it's over $2, it's actually tax deductible. So how great would it be to reduce your tax while saving the lives of refugees on the Morrison government's dime? That's pretty good, I reckon. I think we've run out of questions. I think we've got all your questions. So look, thank you so much for watching. And look, again, so just for those just joining us late, so you know, Cash and I have just been talking about the importance of Medevac. So let me just summarize it. In February, a landmark piece of legislation led by Dr. Karen Phelps with the support of the ALP, the Greens, Centre Alliance and Independents came into law. It was the first time in 70 years that a sitting coalition government lost a vote in the House of Reps. It was landmark legislation. And all it simply did was this. It said after 6 years almost of neglect and indifference and cruelty that led to 12 people dying in Manus, Nauru and Christmas Island, that we would finally start listening to doctors, that we wouldn't have to waste, the great irony, millions of dollars of taxpayers' dollars going through the courts to fight for the basic fundamental right to medical care, that people wouldn't have to die or be close to death before they would get medically evacuated, and a law would pass that would be robust with integrity, that would be orderly. Do you remember when Darden said, hundreds are coming tomorrow?
The swarm.
The swarm. Boats are starting tomorrow. And nothing happened because, unlike what he's championing, the sector together, we work with integrity and with our values and with our standards. And we came together as part of the Medical Evacuation Response Group with wonderful other human rights and refugee organizations, hundreds of amazing doctors out there in the community. And as a team together, work with community advocates and the refugees in these offshore prisons, and created a process where the government agrees in 83% of all applications the doctors have got it right. That in 94% of cases that are approved, it's the government actually saying this person needs to be medically evacuated. Yes, they are not getting the medical or psychiatric treatment or assessment that they need. That in 0% of cases are people being refused on character grounds. And that anyone that is brought here, never, no matter what their background ever is, and so far there's been no one. But should there be anyone suspected of anything, that person remains in detention for the duration that they're here and they don't step foot in the community. But at the heart of this, how we get to such a point, we're actually talking about the fundamental human right to healthcare. And when did it become optional to go, oh, maybe, because we care so much about people dying at sea, maybe a few need to die that didn't die at sea in our offshore prisons. Well, there's already been 12 deaths too many. And so all Medevac does is allow doctors, often specialists, to be working with lawyers and our caseworkers, spending dozens and dozens of hours, up to a couple of months at times, to prepare a person's case, bringing that person with them on that journey to show that this person is at great risk if they are not medically evacuated to get the treatment or assessment and care that they need. And all we've done since February, as a sector, as a team, as an organisation, is ensure that over 130 people have been medically transferred here to get the medical care that the government agrees that they need. That doctors have decided. It should be in the hands of doctors, not politicians. What we've achieved since February is no one else dying offshore. What we've achieved is an orderly process that has integrity, that is robust, that is led by doctors. All we've achieved is reducing the number of people actually self-harming. And all we've achieved is finally giving these men a little modicum of hope after 6 years of despair. Why would we roll that back? So what I'm asking you to do tonight, if you're watching, is to donate to our Medevac emergency appeal. We are way off reaching our target. I wish the rage that people feel about what's happening was matching the donations that we're getting on this. Let me be really honest. We are not there. And I'm really worried about how we're going to keep doing this work if we run out of money to keep doing it. We can't afford to run out of money to keep doing this work. So I'm quite happy to just beg you to please, whatever that amount is, it can be $5, please chip in. We'll look back at this one day where there'll be royal commissions into this and our Prime Minister one day apologising for this. But history is also now, and it's in the decisions we make as people. And you have the power. I don't care how much you give, it's that you make the effort to give, that you refuse to be a bystander. And that you know that the money you give, we're putting to work right now. It is going to people like Cash, as in it is funding the staff of the coalface, as in real people in real roles that we need to keep going. In fact, we're adding 4 more and growing to a team of 12, 11 of which have no funding whatsoever apart from what you donate to it. And they are the people doing the suicide prevention, keeping people's hope going, linking them to the doctors, linking them to the lawyers, making sure people do valid applications, making sure Medevac can actually practically function along with our wonderful doctors and legal partners and refugee advocates and refugees. We can't do this without you, so please get behind us. In a worst case scenario that Medevac is repealed, then our work will pivot to supporting the hundreds of people that will have been medically evacuated by then. Up to over 150 have been approved so far. And for all those that get left behind, in fact, they will become our biggest priority around how do we make sure that things don't get drastically worse. And we made that clear, when we went before the Senate committee, we wanted it on public record that, without Medevac, we really fear for the safety and well-being of people that are left behind. So our work, honestly, has just begun either way come November. So please chip in and get behind us. For those that have already given and those that have already donated, a huge thank you. A big thank you, Cash.
Thank you.
To you. Thank you to the donors that are in the room and to the wonderful fundraising and marketing team that have organised tonight. A big thank you to all of you for supporting us and for sharing what we do and all your encouraging words, all your great questions tonight. At the end of all this heaviness that we're talking about, we are really hopeful because we're actually together creating history, saving lives, getting people the medical care that they need, stopping deaths, reducing self-harm and suicide attempts. We're actually achieving something really precious and incredible together. You don't get chances to do things like this very often. It's possibly the proudest thing I've done in 18 years since I founded the ASRC is the work we're doing right now. So help make history with us. Chip in tonight, please, whatever you can, and get behind our work. Thanks so much for watching. We'll keep updating you as we lead up into November. We'll keep updating you. We'll keep going out there and countering, all the mistruths this government is spreading. But again, every time you hear this government talking about Medevac, I simply ask you to think of this. Is healthcare a basic human right? Do we have a moral duty to protect and care for refugees in our care? If stopping someone losing their life, is that a good thing? And if you've answered yes to those questions, well then you're actually on our side, which is basically just the side of decency. It's not the side of politics, the sides of values and morality. Let's start talking about what this is about. We're talking about people like me and you, like us. And it could so easily be your mum, your dad in this situation, your brother, your sister, your partner. And I know all of you would want what we would want, which is dignity, safety and care. That's all we're asking for here. How it ever got to be what it's become now breaks our heart. But what we're focused on is telling a different story about this nation in a different way forward and rewriting the story of this country. You know, when people say, oh, we're better than this, and they go, oh, but are we really? Well, whether we are or not depends on whether we stand up and hold the line and are counted and act and lead when it's needed. And now's when it's needed. I can't be more blunt and clear than that. So if you can, please give what you can tonight. Help us to keep going and fighting the good fight. And we promise to do you proud, but most importantly, to do everything we can to help the sick men and women in Nauru and in Papua New Guinea. Thanks for watching.
Thank
Good
you.
night.